Green book.
Yeah, it's just this film makes me so emotional. Hello and welcome to Check for Traps. Today we are sponsored by Justin Trudeau's Boot Polish. I'm Aaron and this is Josh, and today we'll be reviewing Green Book.
I actually thought that the sponsor for this show was going to be KFC, being the magical food stuff which cures all racism and bridges the gaps between different underprivileged groups. But no, Justin Trudeau, perfect.
Justin Trudeau. I mean, in commemoration of the fourth blackface video coming out today, I thought, you know, what better than Justin Trudeau brand boot polish, the thickest layering available on the market, ladies and gentlemen.
This was a unique experience for me because all at once it was all of the things that we joke about movies about overcoming racism being. It was all of those things. Then it was also the opposite of everything that people said it was. And it also tried to put a twist on the formula in a way that didn't transcend how offensive they normally are is. And it was also hilarious.
Because, I mean, I think we intended to watch this in the cinema, and then our sort of, like, enthusiasm really waned as the reviews came in. And, yeah, no, I watched it. I was like, well, this did win the Best Picture Oscar. Yeah, it was just 10 to 15 minutes of Italian accents, thinly veiled, or sometimes not veiled at all, race hate. Interesting fact here. So, no one asked Viggo Mortensen put on weight. He did that himself. He felt like he was a poser until he gained loads of weight. And I don't know what that says about his perception of like 70s era or 60s era Italian Americans.
Was it all completely improv that his character just loved eating food?
No, that was real. But again, like if you look at pictures of Tony Vallelonga, he is a big man. But he looks nothing like. It wasn't like by becoming big, Viggo made himself look like him. I guess he just did it as like a piece of method.
I think if you have to spend your entire career being as sexy as you can, even when you're playing a, like communist doomer like he did in Captain Fantastic, it's probably a wonderful excuse to just eat 26 hot dogs and say that you're doing so for the role.
Yeah.
I would love an excuse to just become 4 times as large as I am.
Well, interesting fact, actually, in that hot dog scene, he ate 15 hot dogs because they offered for him to throw them up after chewing on them. And he said, A, that's wasteful, and B, throwing them up is actually more disgusting than just eating them.
That's amazing.
Sorry, there's going to be loads of weird interjections.
No, that's brilliant. It's just like, Viggo, look at me. You don't have to do this, okay? It's like, look, I'm playing a character. It's like, Viggo, we're not even rolling. Just don't do the accent, okay? There's no need to eat this many hot dogs. I'll eat as many hot dogs as I fucking want, okay? I'm not going to throw them up.
But then Nick Vallelonga's there behind him, like, keep doing the accent. What a weird time where you can take the stories your dad told you, turn them into an Oscar-winning film, written or directed by the guy who did Dumber and Dumber.
You mentioned the first 15 minutes. The first 15 minutes was just Tony Vallelonga, and I felt bad because I know that this was a moralizing tale of overcoming racism, which is objectively a noble artistic pursuit, but he was so hilarious, and he was such a goof and a goon, and just everything that you could possibly imagine. Like, he was like a one-off episode from Friends.
Always Sunny or something? Or like, Cheers, any given sitcom, like, he could have walked in and been perfect in. And I tell you what, I don't know about you, for all the bad faith they did, like, it did kind of work. Like, I was always kind of rooting for him, even when he was being a bit of a racist.
I loved him, and I thought he was so endearing, but maybe not in the most respectful way.
No, not at all.
I felt the I felt the kind of the train coming towards me of the serious film, and it did happen. And because I walked in with a kind of disregard for the legacy of this film because of the poor reviews, I was just like, I would happily just watch 2 to 6 hours of Tony Vallelonga just being a goofball, winning hot dog eating competitions.
Tell you what, I did actually have a reservation that I thought I was going to bring up, and I actually don't feel happy bringing up now. I really thought he was going to be sort of wisdom from the, wisdom of idiots sort of character.
Yes.
And there were a couple of moments of that. They were nowhere near as bad as I thought.
I think now is a good time to establish that I'm not saying that I think that I learned anything from this movie, and I think that it probably fell below what maybe it was marketed as, possibly not what it was created for. But yeah, I did actually think it was fine. I thought it was funny. I expected it to be way worse, trying to heavy-handedly teach me a lesson. And it's not that it never did those things, and there were some real laugh-out-loud moments. Even the central premise, I think that they thought that the idea that instead of it being, because we've seen the movie before where it's like, oh, black people, white people, oh, the white guy's going to learn something from the black guy. This time, their attempt to kind of turn that on his head was to be like, oh, now this time it's the black guy who's really uptight, and he's going to learn something from the kind of nitty-gritty working-class white guy.
I was about to say, it felt more like a class tale at this point. It was more like, oh, look what the upper classes could learn from the earthy working class America.
That doesn't mean to say that we thought it was profound, but it was funny.
No.
And it was...
No, I'll never say it's profound. That's the thing. It almost felt...
Of course.
That's what made it feel strange, is it was almost like it was a film that had won Oscars and was like being touted as a, I mean, there are some people, when you look at the comments, there are people who say like every American should see this film.
Yes.
Like there are ridiculous people. But it's like, other than like some uncomfortable portrayals of racism in the Deep South, I could literally see like the times where Nick Vallelonga would have been sat down with his father and like would have told him these stories, because they are funny stories. A man who worked nightclubs, seeing two worlds that he was never going to see. Like he saw, the racist stuff he'd never been to, and he saw the world, concert piano.
I just liked how, I guess that there's just no way to put this kind of thing to film without it being silly, but they certainly didn't seem to think so. But like when they were listening to the radio, and like we've established that Tony is racist, not past the point that he won't work for someone, which I don't know how virtuous that is. But they're sitting there, they're listening to the radio, and he's like, what do you mean you don't know Chubby Checker? Well, Chubby Checker, all of these guys, these are your people, man. And they seem to think it's worthy of note that he understands the pop music that's predominantly made by black people more than Don Shirley does. And then, again, with the fried chicken solves all racism, really drove me absolutely right around the hell skeleton, man. I was laughing my ass off.
The idea that Don Shirley wouldn't have known who Aretha Franklin was pretty insane.
What's the gentleman called? He was in Moonlight and then he's in this. It's something Ali, but he's
Mashallah Ali.
Mashallah, yeah. He was so otherworldly that it could only be comical, because like when they're eating the chicken, it's just like, but how do we eat it if we do not have plates and utensils?
Where are my utensils? He's like, I do not
you
wish
eat it
to
off the bone. What are you going to... You throw it out the window over there.
I know that Don Shirley had a throne, but the fact he is sitting on the throne itself would have been fine. It's the fact the throne was on a little plinth that put him like a good half a foot above Viggo Mortensen that broke me.
And he's already taller than him.
Yeah, exactly.
He's already way taller than him.
It's like, because at that point, like, even if that is like a recreation of Don Shirley's apartment, I would skip the plinth, because the visual language of cinema makes it look so dumb and so.
I'm gonna follow through fried chicken to its logical endpoint and then like dispose of it. But it was just, I thought it was funny. They established it was it was the classic scene. It's like, oh, you got to enjoy yourself sometimes. You know what? You got to let go of your sensibilities. And
eat every meal like it's your last.
Yes. Following one of there's a few scenes of Don Shirley actually being beaten up and racially aggravated attacked. Serious change of pace, a very serious moment. And then in the next scene, they were at a house that he was performing at. And obviously, I was still feeling the pain and sadness at having seen something so brutal. And yet then it was like... And so, because we've consulted with the local people who are of, I don't know, like Don Shirley's race, like some super racist shit, they were like, we've decided to make some food that he'll appreciate. And they pull the thing off, and it's fried chicken and sweet corn. And fucking Tony just looks at him and he's like, yeah, I fucking told you, that's your shit, man. And
yeah, I thought that was quite a good one, because Don Shirley's reaction was quite muted. It was like he sort of like sighed a bit and like looked down, and he was trying to be supportive, and so there was like quite a nice little confluence of emotions there. But what a fucking ridiculous scene.
And I could have forgiven it if obviously, part of the resolution where they finally go to that bar instead of playing at the house, you can see them and they order and eat fried chicken and drink whiskey, and I thought, what a bizarre thing to double down on as being, your kind of resistance into compromise, into acceptance. That being the motif. Fried chicken, of all things.
Insane. And what, like, again, like, is the sort of thing that only, I think, a man who was told stories by his crazy old dad could have then written into a film. And obviously, I guess, have been influential enough to say, yeah, no, keep that in. That's great. I really liked, by the way, the bit he obviously Don Shirley goes on the very specific rant about piano players who put whiskey on the piano, and I love when he sits
Yes.
down at the piano, he takes the whiskey off. But what I love more than that is Vigo laughs at that, like we're supposed to. Like it wasn't enough to let the audience just be like, ah. It's like Vigo's also got to be there, like, ah, he did the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, exactly.
It was like a weird, like yeah, an actual audience surrogate. It was very. I don't think I can't remember seeing that before. That was new.
It was one of my. I guess I'll jump back into kind of the meta context of it, but while I think it's hilarious and stupid that this won a Best Picture, I think that of almost all Best Picture winners, and while I may not have enjoyed it for the same reasons as they did, exactly like you say, Viggo Mortensen as Tony, cracking up at him removing the whiskey. I mean, you know what? Another moment I really liked from that same scene was that Don Shirley had come through this whole character arc where, right or wrong, however you feel about it politically, whether or not you think it's offensive, I'm open to all of those things, but just in the context of the film, he found himself feeling separated from what may be described by the characters in the film as his own people. And, there's a scene where they stop the car and he sees the people working the fields and he says, if I'm not black enough, if I'm not white enough, if I'm not rich enough, if I'm not poor enough, then what am I? That's fine. But so the resolution to that is they end up at this bar where, he plays the piano and he plays some rock music and he plays some jazz music. And so I was like, oh, okay. But the movie even undercuts its own thing by having them walk outside. And then it's like, oh, yeah, these are your people, Don. This is what you got to have. But then when they're walking towards the car, Viggo Mortensen, Tony, pulls out his gun and fires it in the air because people are waiting to jump them. It was funny, but it was also it was almost like the movie was saying, yeah, it's good to hang out with your own, but don't fucking trust people at these bars because they'll fucking kill you.
See, I actually kind of liked that, but that's fair. I can understand why you wouldn't, because it was definitely going against it. But I think maybe I interpreted it's more complex than that they'd sort of reconciled that it was, because I don't like films that deify the poor. I think that's very conceited. And I liked that they'd been in a rough place and that they'd had a good time and proved that you could have a good time, but still shown the other side of it. And so I guess I gave it the benefit of the doubt, and I was like, all right, it's trying to not be black and white.
I'll tell you what, mate. You've really talked me round, because I as I said, the comedy for me came from.
No, it was because it was ridiculous. Also, the way the gun scene is presented is ridiculous, because he just pulls it out. You don't know they're there. He just pulls it out and they run from there. I think it would have been better if they'd been an establishing shot where he'd seen them leave the bar, because then it wouldn't have seemed so insane. But I agree, it ran like a comedy because they just scamper.
See, maybe it's just because I've seen too many of these heavy-handed movies about racism. I thought it was funny because it undercut what would have otherwise been what I would expect from a cliche storytelling arc that I don't even like that much. But you're right, it did make it more real that even though they'd had this situation, Tony taught him that you still need to be on your guard.
I mean, they introduced a lot of characters and a lot of different concepts in this. Which made you most uncomfortable? Which was the one you remember the most? Was it the KFC or?
No, because I think KFC was just beyond parody. I mean, he was enjoying the idea that there was. I will say one thing that I was actually going to lead into this, but sometimes I felt like within the interactions with Don and Tony actually couldn't put a foot right. Not that this was the overarching point of the movie, but I felt like there was some conflict there. But only today have I kind of thought about it more and realised sometimes when I felt like Don was being unfair to Tony, actually, of course he was, because he was a human being and he had his own shit going on. So
he had a very particular way of operating, and I think, like with his brother, he overthinks things a lot, and he doesn't just let people be. I think there's always he always has to apply a meta narrative to that action, and so I think. And again, by the way, I only grew to like this film in the last 40 minutes. The first hour and hour and 20, as I told you, was quite painful. And so it's only with the benefit of hindsight that I could look back on some of those interactions. At the time, I was not having a good time.
Well, I mean, this is because I was laughing, or I was tutting, or I was just oh, for fuck's sake. But the problem is I walked into it thinking that it was going to fail with that stuff. So the scene I'm referring to, right, is when Don gets arrested at the YMCA for, he's been, I don't know if he was having sex with a man, or I don't know if they were, I don't know if it was heavy petting or nothing, that's none of my business. But Tony shows up and he bribes the police officers. And then when Don is like, those people were judging me and their judgment was wrong and you rewarded them for it. What I thought at the time was that I completely agree with they were obviously horrible bigots. But unlike some of the other things that had happened, it was actually, and this is awful, I want to be very clear, just this is absolutely awful. but it was actually illegal to practice what they would have said at the time was sodomy in that era. And for that reason, I think that while it was terrible that he was arrested, Tony couldn't have really got him out of that situation in any other way.
Oh, agreed.
Does that make sense to you? Like
even,
it was,
yeah. The rules that the South, I think they were in the South at that point, weren't they? Or were they just in, like, the rules that the South set out meant that, like, that was. I mean, yeah. What other way is there? Like, yeah, the cult, like the sort of like the socio, yeah, like everything was working against Don Shirley in that scene, and. Yeah, what was he supposed to just sort of like moralize his way out? But again,
hey, listen, you know, I mean, it's some brotherly love over there. He ain't gonna be having no kids or nothing. I mean, come on, like they're not gonna say.
At the end of the days, he's a human being, and I think you should let him go. Well,
they're
thank
not just
you.
gonna be like, you're right, I was wrong there.
So do you remember when the cellist tells him that like the bomb is dropped, that Don Shirley wanted to take this tour? That it was his idea.
Yes.
So I think in like that moment, he likes to take a stand, and he likes, like he says, he likes to go through things with dignity, and he doesn't like to compromise. So I guess that's an instance of him doing that. But I agree that it's so ridiculous and so sort of like ideological or like inflexible that at that moment you're like, oh, he's not really acting like a human being.
No, I agree, but I also like, you know, based on what you said earlier, I also want to meet you halfway in that even though it doesn't seem that way, you know, in the context of his character as portrayed in this movie, he might just refuse to accept that was the situation. You know, it's that thing where it's like you live as if you live in the world that you know is correct, and then when you know you're brought down by the establishment for it, even though that's happening, you just refuse to accept its legitimacy. But yeah, I thought that Tony was really helping him out. I did really like the gag where he was like, didn't I fucking tell you to not go no place without me? And it's like, I thought that you would want this to be the exception.
Yeah. Maybe the criticism there is, and again, maybe this is more on us than them. I don't want to put it all on them, but that could have been communicated better, that's why he was doing that. Like, you can definitely set it up in that scene that he is being ideologically inflexible. Whereas it just comes off as like, maybe he didn't understand the gravity of his situation. Maybe he's a dumbass. Like, it could have been communicated that he didn't think they deserve it because he is so not a pragmatist.
Yes.
That he was unwilling to give ground to even the people who literally had him over a barrel.
As far as the most uncomfortable stuff is obviously the Birmingham situation. We all know about the literally explosive racist history of like Birmingham and stuff. I mean, it was sad that he'd gotten that far into the tour. I think the disparity between how happy they were to receive him and their insistence that he stay in a cupboard. Yeah, I mean, that made me uncomfortable. I thought the bit earlier where all of the drivers had to stay outside. I know that Tony was gambling with them and stuff, but that was depressing. Can't try on the clothes
from them. I really loved the fake smiles and like the lines that they weren't willing to cross. I thought that was one of the film's real strong points and why I really enjoyed the last 40 minutes. I think probably my one, weirdly enough, my favorite one was the one you didn't mention, which was the outhouse. I really enjoyed that. That was, and then like I really liked the line where there's like driving back and he's like, "Oh, you could go in the woods." He's like, "Animals go in the woods." He's like, "Well, I would go in the woods."
Yeah. Because you're like, animals go in the woods, and he was like, "I'd go in the woods." But then earlier they kind of established he's like, you can, but you don't have to. I don't want to have to, and I feel like I might have to. And when he was gambling with the all of the black drivers outside the house, even though it maybe wasn't necessarily fair of Don Shirley because he was trying to make him learn elocution before he came into the house, he was just like, you had a choice to be inside or outside. They didn't have a choice, and I think that led into the, animals go in the woods. You might be okay with going in the woods, but I'm not okay with going in the woods. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, that's the thing. Like Tony, or to Don Shirley, it appears like Tony does have a choice, whereas Tony, I guess, either doesn't feel like he has a choice or has accepted his lack of choice, or his choice. And I think that's what I really liked about. And again, like is a really uncomfortable and probably poorly handled scene, but I kind of got what they were going for when Tony starts saying that he's more black than Don Shirley. I don't think that was the right language for it.
I really agree, because it was as soon as he said that line, I really turned off to the scene. Because any other language, I just, and obviously, this guy, he's not a...
He could have even just said, "I'm more oppressed than you," or like, "I have it harder than you." Like, it didn't need to be, "I'm more black than you." It's just like, "I'm poorer than you." You talk like you're the underclass. I'm the one who You know, I don't live in
Yeah.
the palace. It didn't need to say I'm blacker than you. And I get that that's maybe like you said, the real people, that might have been the language used. I don't think they probably went into that, and I don't think even if they did, you needed to frame it like that, because I think you can frame it better.
So, like what you said, I don't think when the writers wrote that line, they thought, oh, well, that's how Tony would have expressed himself. He would have said, I'm blacker than you. No, I don't think that's what happened. I just don't think that they thought about it enough. And I think that it would have, this is a story, and there are 1,000 of other ways that Tony may have said that line. Yeah, if if he needed to turn it into a class thing or even a talent thing, because because he said later in that whole soliloquy, he was like, I fucking do this, I ride the bus, I do all of that stuff, and it could have been more about the fact that Don Shirley was very talented rather than him just saying, I'm blacker than you. Like, it could have been a whole thing about how, Tony, it's that great bit from the end of that otherwise average movie, Trainspotting 2, where Begbie says, smart cunts like you, like everyone, you've always got something going, but what about men like me? We have to take what we can with our hands and our fists. And it could have been that, but it really put the fucking skids on it when he was like, I'm fucking blacker than you over here, I like my chicken and stuff.
It could have been really interesting if it had just been handled slightly differently. Obviously, the writing directing team behind this is really strange, and I do think they probably became greater than the sum of their parts in making this. Not like Academy Award winning greater than the sum of their parts, but
of course
things seemingly fell together quite nicely for them.
I found it really interesting because they did a plot beat which was exactly the same as Home Alone, where he wasn't the... I know that you watched that recently with me for the first time, which was a very special moment for me. But when he's like, I haven't spoken to my brother for a while, whatever, there's a situation, and then Tony says that, there's a lot of lonely people out there that are just waiting for someone else to make the first move. And that's the same as the snow shoveler in Home Alone who hasn't spoken to his son for ages.
Yeah, I do remember that.
And the only reason I bring that up is because in my head, like, that was just almost like a dim light bulb just went, oh, that's a, what's his name? That's a John Hughes beat. And then the end of the movie, when they were like, oh, I gotta make it home for Christmas Eve. And I obviously, slow train to Conclusion Town, but I was like, oh, obviously Don Shirley will be alone and then want to spend it with him. But that's also the ending of a John Hughes movie, Planes, Trains and Automobiles, because John Candy ends up going for Christmas with Steve Martin because he doesn't have a family. So that's my trivia. I saw into the hack mind.
That's really good. I can only imagine that Nick Vallelonga was fresh off a John Hughes binge.
Exactly.
When he penned this.
Probably grew up on those movies. But so how did you feel about the ending?
I thought that the last challenge in the South was fine and nice. I like, again, like, it was a bit trite, but I called it obviously, as I think it was fairly obvious, but I liked that the police officer that pulled them over last just wanted to help them.
Yeah.
Well, that was a really nice scene. Yeah, I guess if anything, I'd say like the ending was weirdly formulaic compared to the rest of the film, compared to what A Mad Ride the West of the film was. Like, yeah, you could tell that he was going to end up spending Christmas there. You could tell he was going to drive him back because he became too tired. I thought that was fine and nice. Yeah, it sort of resolved quite normally. I quite liked. I don't know what it was trying to tell us. I guess it was just trying to set the mood. But I liked like the pawn shop guy came around at the end and they were all like ribbing him and stuff. Like that little like Italian Christmas dinner scene was quite charming. The little conclusion to the love letter thing was charming. It was a nice ending to make that whole thing worthwhile, because that was kind of weird as well.
I was baiting you into this, mate. I'm not gonna lie. I laughed my ass off at that just because when they first started doing that, Tony was just
so
like,
obviously not him.
Well, yeah, but like, and that's the thing. Like, this was where they failed, the screenwriters, because it really undercut whatever they were trying to deliver to me emotionally.
Yep.
Because Tony was like, I just finished eating my salad. You are hot. It's very, very hot on this day also. And Don Shirley's like, you've got to talk about the beauty of the fields and the trees. And he would just write them, but with no input from Tony.
Yep.
So it's not like Tony ever said, oh, I can't find the words over here. I ain't so good with those. Like,
hey, Doc, throw me a word.
But he just put words in his mouth for him. And like, I don't want to get dark here or anything. But, you've got no reason to believe from Don Shirley's point of view that his relationship with his wife is even good. Like, it could
Yeah.
have been really bizarre for her. You know, she could have been
Well,
like
this
a...
man's clearly quite violent, and
Exactly.
like,
Thank you for saying it for me. It could have been bizarre for her being like, oh, thank God my abusive husband, possibly abusive husband, is away for 2 months, and now I'm receiving weirdly eloquent love letters from him. But when she was like, oh, thank you for helping with the letters, it was like, well, if you knew he was helping, then, I mean, he wasn't so much helping as he was dictating. I mean, does it really mean anything? I
I
thought it was
guess
entertaining.
it wasn't saying. I guess what I because I thought about this afterwards as well. I guess what she thought is that it's sweet that he would ask him for help. I know he didn't, but she's got no way to know that. So I guess she thought it was just like sweet that the two of them were creating something for her. But
Yeah.
yeah, like you said, she has no way to know that it was just him dictating it, and what that says about Tony Vallelonga, I've got no idea. The problem with this being an Oscar-winning film, the problem with this having had so much debate, is that everything's got to mean something, and I'm honestly not sure most of it does. I think,
That's a really good way of putting it, man.
so much of this can easily just be explained as just like one man's recollection of a really weird year, and this film shows that it's 2 months. It was actually a year they spent on tour.
With a movie like this, and with all sorts of movies I've seen, like, I always wonder how I'd feel about it, much like you just said, if, let's just say, that there are some movies that I'm the only person I know has seen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the only person in my social group, broadly, until I met fucking psychopaths like you. And, you know, it could mean whatever I decided it meant, because there was no outside context.
Yep.
It was just this and
Beautiful
and
isolation.
Yeah, exactly. And a movie like Green Book is one of those movies because we had a really good time watching it. Like, we were laughing a lot, sometimes at it, sometimes with it, often at it. But it's just even a lot of the laughing at it came from the context of it trying to be something and knowing that it had this prestige behind it. And it would have been different. Like, if this was obscure, like, let's say they just completely skimped out on the marketing budget and no one saw it except for us.
No award push. Like...
We'd be pissing ourselves. We'd be recommending it to everyone.
Yeah, I would be
we'd also
really
be saying
weird
there's kernels
film.
of truth in it. They'd be like, yeah, there's some things to it that are actually surprisingly mature, like you say, with the class thing, and yeah,
I'd be like, oh, do you guys, you know, I would be using it as the perfect opportunity to, you know, like brag about Don Shirley. I'd be like, well, look what a cool little film about, comparatively, compared to his contemporaries, little known jazz piano player. Yeah, no, I agree, and I know I think about this a lot. I would love to be able to watch this film out of the context I saw it in. And I can only speculate, but I do believe that I would look upon it a lot more favorably, and I think we would take it for the sort of the film that it is, which is a film about a guy who starred in The Sopranos later in life, written by a guy who stars almost exclusively as a dumbass Italian-American mobster.
yeah.
And that just happens to involve Aragorn and Mahershala Ali. It's a victim of its own a success, if you even want to call it success.
Success, controversy, infamy. Yeah,
infamy probably, because that's the weird thing. Because technically, it's the victor. Like, it has loads of awards. It made its budget. I know it didn't do particularly well, but it made its budget. Like, it's a pretty much a success for, you know. It got the fucking one of the Farley brothers an Oscar. It got Nick Vallelonga an Oscar. Yeah, I unequivocally it should be a success, and yet it's a weirdly tainted film. It's sort of like almost like a Pyrrhic victory. Like, it wasn't, you know, they became weaker for the winning.
Let's talk about the taint. I mean, this is the
Let's blow
because
the lid off this thing.
As we said, you know, we're watching this movie once it arrived on streaming services to see if we can cash in on some kind of, you know, new monetization. No, obviously not. But when the movie, indeed, when the movie came out, we were gonna see it, and then all of the reviews started arriving, and the reviews and the think pieces and the this and the that. And it just, you know, normally I think we're better than this, but it really switched us off watching it. Not necessarily because maybe I did, but not because it painted a picture of the movie as being quite disposable in a way that I hadn't previously thought it would be.
Like vapid almost. Like, yeah, it was like,
Yes.
it's like this is a nothing film, and then also it might be based on some untruths that I'm gonna fully fess up to. I fell for hook, line, and sinker. I was like, yeah, I bet they did that, those bastards.
That's the thing. We're so used to that whole, you know, the biopic, even though this isn't a biopic, because biopics are unanimously shit, and this was pretty decent. But the biopic always misrepresents and always annoys the living relatives. Whereas, we believed when we read that the surviving family of Don Shirley, said that it was awful, and all of these things, like Tony always resented driving him, and he was always racist, and they were never friends. And yeah, the headlines build up and you just believe these things implicitly. And we were wrong, weren't we, Aaron? Because we
Yes.
did some research ourselves, as we always do after we watch a movie. And how deep did this rabbit hole go? It was actually quite depressing. Why don't you fire away?
Yeah, so after I watched during that first part, I was like, oh, I'm gonna start doing some research because again, like I was seeing a film that was, it claimed to sort of like have like sort of like white savior or be like white centric, and while
Yes,
it was
White
obviously
Savior, that was a big one.
and
Yeah.
while it was obviously told from like Tony's perspective, he wasn't he was no paragon. He was the opposite. He looked ridiculous. Like even if Vigo hadn't put on all that weight, he would like the portrayal alone would have made him look insane. But with the weight, he just looked like a deranged maniac.
With the largest breast of chicken you've ever seen in his
Exactly,
mouth.
constantly
Yeah.
eating, and obviously at that point you start to feel like a little bit of a sucker, and so you got to give yourself some knowledge. And I was looking into it, and I actually found audio clips. So obviously the big thing is that Don Shirley's family said that this film wasn't representative of their relationship, and that he always held him as an employee.
Yes.
And there's audio footage that I have tried to verify, and I've verified against other footage of Don Shirley that I've seen and listened to. And it does sound like him, and it seemingly is officially sourced. Certainly, Peter Farley, who spoke to Don Shirley and like got his consent for this film and told him about the contents of this film, who literally says that he was a friend and that they didn't have an employee-employer relationship.
In his own words.
Yeah,
Like,
and so
it was crazy.
therefore, I can only assume that there is some sort of like, I guess, would you call it like political, some sort of political motivation behind the Shirley family's denunciations of this?
I would put it in the same camp as I put the Bruce Lee in Once Upon a Time in America thing. I think it's kind of I know that they didn't have loads to gain, but obviously you speak. So let's the worst common denominator, which is you speak to journalists on this kind of thing and you get some money. But also,
That's
even
what
if
I'm
you
thinking.
take,
Yeah,
you
go on,
can.
there might be more. Go on.
There you go. You can put it down to that, but you can also just put it down to you didn't really know what you were talking about. But if you were estranged, as a lot of the record seems to show,
Yeah, indeed.
from a incredibly successful family member, I mean, there are other parallels. There's a lot of data on this where you try to act as though, or you believe that you were more knowledgeable about them and their lives than you thought you were.
Yeah.
And it could have,
especially if you weren't consulted on, especially if you weren't consulted on it, and the only people consulted on it were the family of the other guy and like the people involved in the other guy's camp, like Peter Farley and like Nick Vallelonga, who Don Shirley spoke to, and also spoke to and said, don't talk to anyone from my family about this, and don't talk to anyone about this.
So that's really worth picking up on what you just said there. Just to be very, very clear, Nick Vallelonga, son of Tony, son of God, spoke to Don Shirley. Yes, he spoke to Don. He spoke to Don Shirley about this, and corroborated some of the stories from his dad. And you were telling me, I mean, I heard the audio clips and I looked into some of this and really called bullshit on the family's testimony. But you were saying that some of the very specific scenes from this movie came straight from the dad and were corroborated. Would you mind pointing out some of those?
Not only from the dad, from Don, in some of those audio clips. Like one of those audio clips is him literally talking about the Kennedy phone call, I think.
Nice.
And so yeah, like they it seems to line up, and it's like, where else would they have got this from except from these two men? Like it doesn't make much sense otherwise. Like Nick Vallelonga's not going to invent the Kennedy phone call.
No, he's not. Exactly.
And yeah, like so. I mean, obviously, and again, like some of it were definitely filled in blanks. Like I can obviously imagine the KFC thing is a dramatization, and that's fine.
If they didn't get loads of money from KFC for that, that's embarrassing.
I really hope they did.
Yeah.
Then again, does KFC? I mean, if I pitched that to a KFC, I would avoid that. I'd be like, KFC cannot support this venture.
I don't know, if I was KFC and you span it at me in the right way and explained that KFC cured racism, I'd be like, fucking yes.
Ah, true. They'd be like, finally, we've been waiting for this. We always had a theory that it was going to cure racism. Like, tick it off the list behind like curing cancer. Like,
the heading of the list is just Colonel Sanders' drunken claims. He would make absurd claims like he invented the question mark and his chicken would cure cancer.
My chicken will cure cancer. I think it's. I don't want to. I never want to say they won, but they did kind of win. I mean, they duped us. The narrative of this film is now their narrative about how it misrepresents, or it portrays a friendship that didn't exist. A friend, which sadly enough seems to be a friendship that maybe did exist. maybe
They
not.
did. They
Like
did. They did win because it wasn't just the Guardian. It wasn't just the Independent. It was everywhere because it's good news. It's good news even if you're on the right wing or on the left wing.
Yeah.
Because if
you
you're on the left
sneer
wing,
at it, you can be like, "Hey, look at that."
exactly. It either confirms a narrative about how these movies are made, and or it's just funny because it involves a lie, but it wasn't a lie. And I think that's what I found so upsetting about it, because we were this is the thing we need to be as clear as possible about. This wasn't the best movie I've ever seen. Far from it. It was decent. Often at times I thought it was ridiculous. But actually finding out that it was more accurate than I ever would have given it credit for, it made me realise that I was really viewing a lot of it with the ideological goggles, as it were. I was like, oh, well, obviously this didn't happen. Oh, well, obviously this is just how the script needs to be written to give like the balance of the characters. Like the Kennedy phone call.
Cynicism won the day. And it was,
Yes.
We were so willing to, we wanted to believe the lie, and so we did. And that upset me, but it's good because I tell you what, if for no other reason, I'm really happy I watched this because now I know what I believe to be the truth and what it seems to be a more convincing truth. And if that can help portray, and again, like especially given the contents of the film, it makes it all the more tragic. It's like this is literally what Don Shirley supposedly undertook this tour to try and stop. Like he wanted to clear up this sort of thing, and like I said, it's unfortunate he's not around to. But then equally, I guess he could, being estranged from his family as he supposedly was, I guess he could never have known that they'd have reacted that way. Like, I guess he'd be like, oh, they'll just, they might, I guess they won't care. They don't care about me, or they barely care about me. Yeah, I mean, that made me kind of upset. And again, as well, especially for the two of them, because again, like I don't believe that they had some sort of grand arcing friendship from the way they both talk about it. It's just like they had a really interesting and quite transformative spirit experience in the South, and then stayed in contact as people do, invested, and that's interesting.
People have crazy years with each other. I mean, exactly. I almost feel like I have to say it again. I just think the context around the lies or maybe the misinformation that's been spread about this movie that's what makes it so interesting, because you found out that there was a real story there about like real friendship. That doesn't necessarily mean that, we sat down, watched Green Book, cried our eyes out, decided that we changed as people or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
None of that happened.
Nope.
We've seen this movie before. It was still good. It was functional. It was funny. It was stupid a lot of the time. And then it really kind of... I mean, you can't really... As long as you treat it respectfully, as you said earlier, you can't avoid the gravity of moments where someone's just simply not allowed to eat in a room for no good reason whatsoever.
It's powerful stuff, and it's really easy as well. But that's what I mean. But it's powerful.
It's easy and powerful, and So we're not saying it was powerful because they put it together masterfully and spent loads of time on it. Exactly, but it's obviously powerful subject matter. I don't want to be too cynical. I don't just. We thought that we were just going to think it was hilarious and dumb.
That's the thing I was expecting. I was expecting just a film that took itself too seriously. I was expecting a film that, that wasn't that good. That thought it was like better than it was. But I don't think it really did. I don't think it thought it was. Yeah, I don't think it thought it was better. That's a really interesting fact. I don't think people said it was like moralizing and stuff. I guess in a way, but not in like nowhere near the extent that people made it out to be.
You've literally hit the nail on the head. Yeah. It may even be worse. I don't know how you're feeling, but it may be worth even ending on this, just because the movie disrespected itself knowingly and disrespected its characters.
That's what I mean. It's such a tonal shift, wasn't it? There was just like we went definitely. Wow, that's a weird one.
It was never trying to be Driving Miss Daisy, and it was also never gonna let itself be Driving Miss Daisy, even though people have said that about it. They made Tony too vulgar. There was too much throwing soda bottles out the window. There was too much petty theft.
Too much KFC.
Yeah, exactly. And too much delight over KFC. And I mean, I think the movie knew it wasn't a massive bridging moment, but I think it was laughing because for Tony it was, for him to be sharing KFC with Don Shirley. And yeah,
I'm happy we saw this one. I honestly didn't think I was going to be. And if that fucking hell while watching it, I especially didn't think I was going to be. But join us for Joker. Thanks for joining us. Let us know on YouTube, on Spotify, whatever, what you thought about Green Book, because I want to hear people talk about this. This is weird.
And especially if you hate it. We want to hear about it if you hate it, in light of the information that we've just kind of dug up for you.
But only hate it if you've seen it. Don't do what we did and hate it before you've seen it, because that's dumb as it turned out to be.
Forgive us our sins. We've been Checked for Traps. This was great. Thank you.
See ya.
Like and subscribe.